fog had swallowed the harbor so thoroughly that the lamps along the quay appeared to float without posts, yellow coins suspended above black water. Newt Scamander stood between two towers of tarred rope, his coat buttoned wrongly, his left boot resting in a puddle that smelled of salt and coal smoke and dead sardines. Beyond the mist, a ship's bell struck twice, and something in the newly unloaded cargo answered with a blow that bent an iron bar. The dock workers scattered at once, abandoning hooks, crates, and a handcart piled with bewitched oranges that had begun shouting insults in 3 languages. Newt only tilted his head. That, he murmured, wasn't an attempt to escape. Across the quay, 4 men in oilskin capes were dragging a long crate down the gangplank of a black-hulled packet boat. Nothing had been painted on its planks by way of a shipping mark, though 3 ministry seals clung to one corner, all forged and one upside down. The chains were wrapped so tightly that the wood bowed between them, and every few feet a brass charm had been nailed into place to numb whatever lay inside. The largest smuggler, a broad fellow with a broken nose and a silver wand tucked behind one ear, struck the side with his gloved fist and told it to be quiet, "You ugly devil." From within came a thin scraping sound, and then 3 slow taps. Inside his coat pocket, Newt's fingers moved, counting the rhythm against his thigh. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more, almost lost beneath the slap of water against the pilings. He had heard bow truckles drum warnings through bark, and erumpents stamp courtship patterns into dry earth. But this was neither threat nor display. The creature was answering the harbor bell. When the bell sounded again, the crate shuddered from end to end, and a pale glimmer leaked through a split in the wood. "Oh," Newt whispered, leaning forward despite himself. "You're listening?" A witch beside him gave a startled squeak and hurried away, clutching a cage of 2 snoozing puffskins, dyed fashionable shades of violet. Newt used her departure to cross behind a stack of Romanian wandwood marked for customs inspection, moving with the distracted air of a man who had every right to be where he was and had simply forgotten why. It was an expression he had perfected in ministries and railway offices, and once at an extremely hostile garden party in Surrey. One smuggler glanced over, saw the untidy hair and the scuffed case and the apologetic stoop of the shoulders, and dismissed him. People often found Newt harmless. Creatures were usually more accurate. The crate struck the bottom of the gangplank with a crack that threw a splinter across the wet stones. Something glittering clung to it, no larger than a fingernail, curved like a fish scale, though its surface held the gray-blue sheen of moonlight on snow. Before anyone else noticed, Newt stepped on it, crouched, as though tying his bootlace, and lifted it beneath his coat. It trembled in his palm, a faint vibration that traveled up into his wrist. Then a wave came over the quay wall and sprayed salt water across his knuckles, and the scale dissolved into a thread of silver mist. He was still staring at the empty skin of his hand when the broken-nosed man shouted for someone to move the beast. They hauled the crate towards a line of waiting carriages, 2 accomplices clearing the path ahead with curt bursts of magic. A stack of lobster pots sprang legs and scuttled aside. A customs lantern turned its glass face towards the wall, and 3 muggle sailors became abruptly fascinated by a drain pipe. Newt followed at a distance, stepping over coils of wet rope and a dozing Krupp whose forked tail thumped once against the cobbles. The Krupp's nose lifted as the crate passed, but instead of growling, it flattened itself to the ground and covered its eyes with both paws. "Interesting," Newt said. The Krupp peeked at him, decided he was no help, and hid its nose again. Near the customs shed, the smugglers paused beneath a corrugated iron awning as rain began to tick overhead, and the crate went still at once. No scrape, no answering tap, no pressure against the chains. Even the silver glow between the boards had gone. Broken Nose pulled a folded parchment from his coat and set to arguing with a narrow witch in a cloche hat, her lipstick the color of sealing wax. The buyer had paid for it breathing, she hissed. Breathing? Yes, he agreed. Cooperative? No. A third man laughed with his hand still wrapped around his wand and said that once it reached Prague, they could teach it manners. Prague. Newt lowered his eyes and pretended to study a shipping notice while rain ran from his hair onto the page. It advertised passage for 6 cauldron makers, 1 vampire under license, and livestock excluding dragons, basilisks, and anything with a documented appetite for conductors. Behind him the creature shifted as the awning rattled in the wind, and the nearest chain drew tight with a metallic shriek. It did not strike the wall beside the men. It pressed instead towards the harbor, towards the open strip of sky beyond the roof, and Newt's grip closed around the handle of his case. A customs inspector emerged from the shed in plum-colored robes beneath a muggle raincoat, his mustache beaded with damp. He held out one hand and demanded the manifest. The witch in the cloche hat smiled and produced a parchment from her sleeve, but the inspector's eyes had already settled on the crate. From inside it came a soft, high note, so clear that every gull on the warehouse roofs fell silent. For one extraordinary second, the fog above the harbor rippled as if a vast wing had passed through it. The inspector's mustache drooped. "What exactly are you transporting?" "Antique organ pipes," said Broken Nose. The crate screamed. Wood burst outward near its upper corner, and a long shape struck through the gap, too quick for Newt to see clearly. A horn, perhaps, or a talon, or the hooked end of a wing. It flashed silver blue beneath the lamps and was gone before the smugglers had their wands up. A chain snapped loose and whipped across the stones, sending the customs inspector backwards into a pyramid of eel barrels. Broken Nose fired a red jet through the broken plank, and the sound from inside the crate changed to a harsh, breathless rattle. Newt was already moving, his case thumping against his knee. "Don't stun it again," he called, arriving with far less authority than the words required. 4 wands swung towards him. He stopped, with both hands raised, rain dripping from his sleeves. "The charms are interfering with its balance. Unless you'd like several 100 pounds of frightened animal rolling into the harbor, I'd stop." The cloche-hatted witch looked him over from muddy boots to crooked bow tie and asked who he was supposed to be. Newt glanced at the cracked crate, where a dark eye had appeared between 2 boards, wide, reflective, fixed upon the narrow strip of sky. Someone who knows it isn't an organ. For a heartbeat, the eye shifted to him. Its pupil opened like ink, spreading through water, and tiny points of light moved across the iris in patterns that did not match the lamps. Newt forgot the wands, forgot the smugglers, forgot the customs inspector climbing furiously out of the eels. He took one slow step closer and lowered his voice. "All right, I see you." The creature's breathing eased by the smallest measure, and then Broken Nose seized him by the collar and flung him against the customs wall. By the time Newt recovered his hat, the smugglers had already loaded the crate onto a covered lorry charmed to look empty. Its wheels sprayed harbor water across the cobbles as it rattled off towards the railway quarter, brass charms flickering along its sides beneath the disguise. One hand against the wall, Newt stood in the rain and watched the red tail lamps shrink into the fog. A sliver of broken plank lay at his feet, its inner side scored by dozens of shallow lines arranged in curved rows. Not claw marks. Constellations, scratched again and again into the wood by something trying to remember the sky. Where the harbor smell of brine gave way to soot, hot metal and coffee boiled too long in dented copper pots, the railway quarter began. Newt reached it by cutting through an alley of wand repairers, past shuttered windows where self-stirring cauldrons muttered in their sleep, and a row of broomsticks dripped rain from their twigs. Ahead, the smuggler's lorry jolted beneath an archway marked Goods and Post, its disguise stuttering whenever the wheels struck a pothole. For an instant, the long-chained crate showed in full, silver light pulsing through its broken corner. Then the illusion swallowed it again, leaving only rainwater hanging in the shape of something enormous. Two uniformed railway wizards were checking tickets at the station entrance beneath a clock that ran 7 minutes slow on purpose, supposedly to discourage panic. Newt joined a knot of travelers crowded around a luggage trolley that bore a caged augury, 3 hat boxes, and a brass samovar that kept demanding a passport. Without slowing, the smugglers crossed the concourse. Their documents were good enough to fool the first inspector, though the second glanced at the lorry and frowned when the augury began to croak. Every lamp in the hall dimmed at once, and beneath the illusion, the creature struck the crate with a single hollow blow. "Storm coming," said the augury's owner, a pale man with mourning ribbons pinned to both sleeves. "No," Newt replied, watching the station roof. "It's already here." Steam rolled across Platform 9 in white sheets, and the night train waited beneath iron rafters glazed with rain. A narrow Continental Express built for wizarding traffic, painted deep green, its brass window frames etched against accidental apparition. Porters loaded trunks that kicked, cages that complained, and one sleeping baby griffin disguised under a tartan blanket. Beside the rear mail carriage, where a sliding door stood open like a dark mouth, the smugglers drew up their lorry. Broken Nose jumped down first and waved his wand at the nearest porter. "Special cargo, ministry orders." The porter was a square woman with red cheeks and forearms like rolling pins, and she planted both boots. Ministry can lift its own special cargo, and it can pay the excess weight. At that, the witch in the cloche hat produced a purse that clinked heavily enough to shorten the argument. While coins changed hands, Newt slipped behind a tower of owl post to watch the crate emerge from the lorry. Rain hissed where it touched the silver light, leaking through the boards, each drop vanishing before it reached the ground. The creature had learned silence. That troubled him more than the blows had. When the crate rolled beneath the station roof, Its internal glow thinned until only a faint line remained around the broken plank. The chains rattled once and settled. No answering taps followed the clock chimes. No eye appeared in the gap. Newt moved closer under cover of a family arguing over whether their Kneasel required a child's ticket. Through the split wood drifted a smell, clean and sharp beneath the coal smoke, like cold stone after lightning. 3 steps from the crate, one of the smugglers caught him, the youngest of the group, narrow-shouldered with a patchy mustache and a wand held too tightly to suggest confidence. "You again," he said. "Lose something at the docks?" Newt was looking past him to the crate, where the brass-numbing charms had begun to vibrate against their nails. "Possibly, though I think it may have lost me first." The young man blinked. "What?" "Your cargo is becoming unwell." Newt pointed to the lowest chain where beads of water were creeping upward against gravity. "See that? Condensation moving towards the wood. It's drawing moisture out of the air, perhaps to breathe, perhaps to orient itself. Difficult to say while you're keeping it inside a packing case." The smuggler's expression hardened, though his gaze dropped despite himself. "It breathed fine on the boat. Boats have open decks." A whistle shrilled beneath the glass roof, sharp enough to wake every owl in the post cages, and the crate convulsed. One wheel lifted clear of the platform, the chains snapped taut, and the numbing charms flared a sickly yellow along the planks. Passengers shouted as trunks rolled sideways, and the baby griffin woke beneath its blanket with a noise like a saw blade. Newt lunged, pressing one palm to the broken corner, while the young smuggler raised his wand. "Wait," he said. "Listen to the roof." Rain hammered the station glass in thousands of quick silver knocks, and beneath it came another sound, thin and uneven, almost hidden by the locomotive's breath. The creature was repeating the pattern. Each burst of rain brought a tremor through the crate. Each pause drew a soft, clicking answer from within. Newt bent close enough for splinters to catch his cheek. "You don't fear the storm," he murmured. "You're trying to hear through it." Broken Nose strode back along the platform and seized Newt's shoulder. "I warned you." His wand pressed beneath Newt's jaw, cold brass against wet skin. All around them travelers hurried aboard, pretending not to notice, because armed disputes near international trains were best treated as weather. The cloche-hatted witch hauled the mail carriage open and snapped, "Get it loaded before the conductor seals the wards." Newt let himself be dragged aside, eyes fixed on the crate as it rolled towards the train. The final jolt shook something loose from the broken plank. A pale strip fell and stuck in the oily water beside Newt's boot. He stooped as Broken Nose shoved him away, palming it before the man could see. No scale, this. A feather-like filament, rigid along the center and soft at the edges, silver blue, with tiny dark markings spaced in repeating clusters. By the time Newt understood the pattern, the mail carriage door had already slammed shut. Stars again, the markings, though these formed a curved path rather than a fixed constellation. Migration, he thought, looking from the filament to the rain-black roof above the platform. The creature had not scratched a memory into the crate at random. It had been tracing a route. Then the train began to move. Wheels clanked, steam surged past the windows, and the final car slid away along the platform, with the smugglers gathered behind its curtained glass. Newt ran beside it, one hand gripping his case, the other reaching for the brass rail. "Ticket!" shouted the red-cheeked porter behind him. "You need a ticket!" He caught the rail, missed the step, struck the carriage with his shoulder, and hauled himself upward as the platform lamps blurred into yellow streaks. "Put it on my account," he called back into the rain. Her reply vanished beneath the train's gathering thunder. Newt wedged one boot onto the narrow step and flattened himself against the carriage while the city roofs slipped away behind him. Through the wall came 3 quiet taps, a pause, then 2 more. This time he tapped the answer with his knuckles against the metal. Something inside the mail carriage tapped back. The brass rail trembled under his fingers as the train gathered speed, dragging him past the last warehouses and into a corridor of wet signals, black fields and telegraph wires singing in the wind. Rain needled his face. Smoke flattened itself along the carriage roof, hot and bitter enough to sting his eyes. The narrow exterior step had been designed for railway staff with excellent balance and very little imagination. Newt pressed his shoulder to the metal wall, shifted his case behind one knee, and tapped the pattern again. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. The answer came from farther inside the mail carriage, followed by a long scrape across wood. Whatever occupied the crate had shifted towards him, though iron plating and several feet of stacked post still lay between them. Another sound reached him through the clatter of wheels. A faint chiming, irregular but delicate, as though tiny glass bells were striking one another. Newt rested his ear against the carriage. "Yes," he said into the rushing dark, "I'm still here." A tunnel mouth opened ahead, cut into the hillside like a black wound. Newt caught sight of it only when the engine's lamps swept across the stone arch and lit the warning plaques nailed above. He flattened himself against the carriage, an instant before the dark swallowed the train. Smoke thickened at once, trapped between iron roof and carriage tops. Sparks streamed backwards in furious orange ribbons. Somewhere inside the mail van, the creature threw itself against its restraints. That impact sent a deep boom through the wall. Chains lashed wood, parcels toppled, and one of the smugglers shouted for someone to strengthen the silencing charm. A jet of yellow light flashed through a seam around the door, and after it came a cry, too sharp and high to belong to any human throat. Newt's boot slipped from the rain-slick step. For one stomach-turning instant he hung by both hands above the racing gravel, his case banging against the wheels below. Then the tunnel ended in a burst of cold air and moonless countryside. He swung one leg up, found the edge of the step, and hauled himself back against the carriage with a grunt that would have startled anyone accustomed to his usual quiet. "Unnecessarily dramatic," he told the train, which answered by rounding a bend hard enough to slam his hat against the wall and carry it off into the night before he could grab it. Ahead, a red lamp glowed above the connecting platform between the mail carriage and the sleeping coach. To reach it, he had to cross 10 feet of exterior ledge, no wider than his palm, rainwater racing along its rim. Newt edged sideways, one hand gripping rivets, the case handle clamped in his teeth. Below, pale fence posts flickered past in a relentless procession, while behind the carriage windows passengers slept beneath embroidered blankets and a waiter in cream gloves poured midnight chocolate without once looking outside. 3 separate charms sealed the connecting door, all crude and rather loud. When he touched the handle, a purple spark snapped at his thumb, and a translucent mouth appeared in the glass to shout, "Authorized personnel only." "Yes, thank you," Newt whispered, drawing his wand. "Very convincing." He traced a small counter-spiral across the lower hinge, waited until the mouth drew breath for another warning, and slipped inside while it was still pronouncing the word "authorized." Warmth struck first, and with it the smells of coal dust, damp wool, sealing wax, and frightened owls. Sacks of International Post were piled to the ceiling, their destination labels rearranging themselves as borders shifted in sleep. On a shelf, a cage of miniature storm petrels rattled, each bird no larger than a walnut and flashing blue whenever the train passed beneath a cloud. At the far end stood the long crate, chained to iron rings in the floor. 3 smugglers crowded around it, while the young man with the patchy mustache clutched a bleeding hand against his chest. "It never touched you," Newt said. Every wand turned. Broken Nose stood nearest the crate, oilskin cape discarded, shirt sleeves dark with sweat. "How did you get in here?" Newt only glanced at the young smuggler's hand, where blood ran from a splinter wound rather than a bite or a claw. "Poorly," he said. "Your friend injured himself on the timber." From behind a stack of parcels stepped the cloche-hatted witch, lipstick still immaculate despite the journey. "Throw him off at the next bridge." There was none of Broken Nose's bluster in it. The voice was flat, practical, and therefore a good deal more alarming. Newt kept his wand lowered while his eyes moved over the crate. Fresh gouges scarred the boards near the roof, all angled upwards, and silver condensation covered the inner edges of the broken corner. A low humming filled the carriage. The storm petrels stopped flashing and turned their tiny heads towards the crate in perfect unison. Through the gap, Newt glimpsed part of the creature at last, a folded membrane stretched over narrow bones, patterned with drifting points of light. It resembled a wing, though no wing he knew carried its own moving sky. The light slid across the surface as the train changed direction, then scattered when the iron roof passed beneath another signal gantry. "You've put it in darkness and surrounded it with metal," Newt said, stepping closer. "Every vibration tells it the sky is moving, while every sense insists there is no sky at all." Broken Nose lifted his wand and said it was an animal. "Yes," Newt replied, "which is why this is working so badly." The train entered another cutting, stone walls rising close on both sides, and their echo multiplied the wheels into a deafening roar. The creature's humming climbed until the brass fittings began to quiver. The storm petrels threw themselves against their cage. Postal sacks burst open, and hundreds of letters swarmed through the carriage like startled white moths. One envelope bit Broken Nose on the ear, and while he swore and swatted at it, Newt ducked beneath his arm to reach the crate. His palm found the exposed membrane through the broken plank. It was colder than rainwater and trembling so rapidly that the lights beneath its skin blurred into silver rivers. Newt did not grip it. He simply rested his hand there and began tapping the rhythm against the wood with one finger. 3, pause, 2. The humming faltered. Beneath the thunder of the train, a second pattern answered him from inside the crate, longer this time and painfully precise. Newt listened until he recognized what had changed. The creature was no longer copying the harbor bell or the rain. It was asking where the stars had gone. A blue curse struck the crate above Newt's shoulder and burst into sparks across the iron bands. The creature recoiled so violently that the whole carriage lurched on its suspension, scattering letters beneath the smuggler's boots. Broken Nose shoved through the white storm of post, one hand pressed to his bitten ear, the other aiming his wand at Newt's spine. Move away from it. Newt kept his palm against the trembling membrane. You may find this difficult to believe, he said, but shouting has not improved matters. Yell? The witch slashed her wand towards the carriage roof, and a silencing charm dropped over the crate like invisible cloth, smothering the creature's hum and the answering chime beneath its skin. At once, its moving lights contracted into one dense, frantic cluster. Newt drew his wand and cut the charm apart with a precise upward flick. Sound rushed back in, wheels, rain, tearing paper, and a cry that made the storm petrels flatten every feather. That cost more than your coat, the witch said. Yes, Newt replied, glancing at his mud-streaked sleeve. Most things do. The young smuggler with the injured hand had backed towards the connecting door, watching the crate as though it might open its jaws and swallow the carriage, though the blood on his fingers came only from the splinter lodged beneath his palm. It knew the tunnel was coming, he said. Before we reached it, it knew. Broken Nose rounded on him and told him to shut up, Emile. The young man obeyed, but his eyes stayed on the shifting silver glow. A curve in the track threw everyone sideways. Newt caught an iron ring beside the crate. Broken Nose crashed into a tower of parcels marked fragile. Transylvanian glass leeches. The box split with an expensive tinkle and released 6 transparent creatures that slithered under the shelving and set to sucking the color from nearby envelopes. Red stamps faded pink, green wax turned gray, and a purple howler emerged from a sack to open its mouth and roar in complete silence. Emile stared at the mess. We are never getting the deposit back. Through the broken plank, the creature tapped again, shorter this time, urgent, directed towards the nearest window. Newt followed its attention to the wet glass beyond the stacked post. For several seconds, the clouds thinned and exposed a scatter of stars above the racing fields, and silver points flared across the folded membrane in perfect correspondence. Then steam from the engine swept past, veiling the sky, and the creature beat once against the crate roof. Newt pulled a mail sack aside. Help me clear the window. Emile looked at Broken Nose, then at the board straining under the chains, and said it would break loose. It is trying to see, Newt said. Those are different things. Another sack followed the first, and moonlight spilled across the carriage floor in a narrow moving band. The creature quieted. Wherever that light touched the wood, its breathing slowed, though every shadow thrown by a passing telegraph pole set a shiver running down the chains. Newt, crouched beneath the window, noticed a line of condensation escaping the crate in a thin silver thread. It curled across the floor towards the patch of moonlight, climbed the carriage wall, and spread over the glass like frost, and within it tiny shapes began to form. Peaks, a crescent lake, and 7 stars bent above a dark ridge. Emile edged closer despite himself. Is that a map? A memory, perhaps? Newt crouched by the frost pattern and traced its outline without touching, studying the steep, close-set mountains and the broken summit on the western edge. A long valley lay beneath them, marked by spirals that might have meant rising air. So the creature had not merely been following stars, it had paired them with a landscape. Broken Nose found his footing again and kicked a glass leech off his trouser cuff. Enough! He seized the window blind and hauled it down, and the moonlight went with it. As the frost map slumped into water, the crate answered with a tremendous blow that tore one floor ring loose. Emil flinched towards the door and got out. Raise it again, Merrick. The buyer wants it contained. Broken Nose snapped. The buyer isn't here. Emil's voice cracked, but it carried. We are. For the first time, the cloche-hatted witch looked uncertain, though it lasted no longer than a blink. Then she pointed her wand at Newt. Bind him. Coils of red cord sprang from the tip, snapped around his wrists, and pinned his arms to his coat, and he stumbled backwards into the postal shelves. Broken Nose dragged the blind up again, but only halfway, leaving a thin bar of sky. There, he growled at the crate. That is all you get. The creature pressed towards the light. One dark eye appeared again between the boards, larger than Newt had realized, its iris crossed by moving constellations. It ignored the drawn wands and found him among the spilled letters, and the pupil narrowed at the sight of the cords around his wrists. A low vibration rolled through the carriage. One by one, every brass charm nailed to the crate began working itself loose. The nails rose from the timber with soft metallic squeals. Shouting over one another, the smugglers fired reinforcement spells into the chains while the charms spun free and clattered across the floor. Newt twisted his bound hands until 2 fingers reached his case latch. This may become rather crowded, he said. The latch opened. A furry paw shot out, seized the nearest brass charm, and vanished back inside. Another appeared for the second, quicker than sight and considerably greedier. Broken Nose stared at the case. What in blazes was that? Working the red cord against the metal edge, Newt didn't look up. A misunderstanding with pockets. The niffler erupted from the case in a glossy black blur, its pouch already bulging with stolen fittings. It skated through a heap of letters, ducked a curse, and sprang onto the crate where 3 more brass charms gleamed invitingly along the upper chain. Each vanished beneath its paws with a delighted chirp. The numbing enchantments failed in sequence, one after another, and the creature's silver light flooded every crack in the timber. For one breath, the whole mail carriage became a lantern, racing through the rain. At the roof, the boards split apart, revealing a sweep of silver-blue membrane and an arch of delicate bone, only part of a wing, cramped and folded, and yet it filled the space above them. Stars moved across it in slow migration, brighter near the strip of real sky at the window. Newt looked from that impossible wing to the frost still trembling on the glass, and the scattered pieces settled into shape. This creature had been born to cross whole countries by night. The train plunged towards another tunnel, its black entrance widening beyond the rain-streaked window. Inside the crate, the wing drew tight and the constellations vanished beneath a surge of darkness. Newt tore one wrist free as the first stones of the tunnel swallowed the engine. "Open the roof hatch," he said. No one moved. Then the creature screamed, and every window in the carriage cracked at once. Glass burst inward in a glittering sheet as the tunnel took the train. The lamps went out, the storm petrels shrieked, and 100 loose letters slapped blindly through the dark. Newt dropped flat beside the crate, while shards rang across the iron floor, then dragged his freed hand along the red cord until the binding loosened at his other wrist. Above the hammering of the wheels, he could pick out Broken Nose swearing, Emil coughing, and the witch ordering everyone to hold the chains. There was no second cry from the creature, only a breath that came in shallow, rapid clicks he could feel through the boards. "Roof hatch," he called again, crawling towards the far wall. "There must be one for ventilation." A curse flashed green-white over his head and scorched a postal sack marked Zurich, Live Doxy Eggs. Broken Nose's voice came from somewhere behind the crate. "Touch that hatch, and I'll throw you under the wheels." Newt found the ladder by running his palm over rivets until cold iron rungs interrupted them. "Yes," he said, setting one foot on the lowest rung. "You've mentioned that general approach." Above a rack of registered owl post sat the hatch, sealed by a wheel handle and 3 years of grease. Newt climbed while the train roared deeper into the mountain, each curve pressing him against the wall. Something slammed the crate below, then stopped short of breaking through. The creature was restraining itself now, folding tighter despite the tunnel's noise and the metal roof crushing every sense of direction, and that effort told Newt more than any claw mark could have. Whatever it was, its terror had not erased its care. A hand seized his ankle. Broken Nose stood beneath him, face lit in pulses by Emil's wand, blood running from his bitten ear into his collar. "Get down." Newt kicked once, missed, and nearly lost his hold as the train struck a rough joint in the track. "I'm trying to prevent your cargo from injuring itself." "My cargo," the man said, tightening his grip, "is worth more frightened." From below came a crack, like a tree splitting in winter. One side of the crate bowed outward, and a narrow limb pierced the planks between 2 chains jointed like a bird's leg, covered in short silver filaments, ending in 4 curved toes that searched the floor without striking anyone. Emil stumbled back. The limb touched a fallen envelope, moved it gently aside, and braced against the iron. Newt looked down. "Did you see that?" "I saw the price of a new crate." The man yanked harder and dragged him a rung lower. Behind him, the witch raised her wand towards the exposed limb. "Don't," Emil said. His voice vanished beneath the wheels, but he stepped between her and the crate anyway. Her curse caught him in the shoulder and spun him into the shelving. For half a second, Newt stopped struggling, surprised less by the spell than by the speed with which she had cast it. Broken Nose glanced back at Emil, and that hesitation was enough. Newt hooked one boot behind the ladder, twisted, and drove the heel of his other shoe into the man's wrist. The grip released with a bark of pain. At the top, the wheel handle refused to move. Newt wrapped both hands around it and pulled until his shoulders shook, but the rust held fast while smoke leaked through the seams above. The Niffler scrambled up the ladder beside him, cheeks bulging, brass charms clinking inside its pouch. "No," Newt told it, "this is not valuable." The Niffler patted the wheel experimentally, found a silver retaining pin hidden beneath the grime, and plucked it free. The handle spun so suddenly that Newt nearly went through the hatch head first. Wind punched down into the carriage, carrying soot, rain, and the iron smell of the tunnel roof racing inches above the train. No open sky yet, only black stone and sparks streaming past, but fresh air swept across the crate and the creature's breathing changed. Its frantic clicks lengthened into a low, wavering note, uncertain and searching. "Keep it open," Newt said. He pushed the hatch as far back as the hinges allowed and braced it with one arm. A red spell struck the ladder beneath his foot and melted a rung into a glowing curve. Broken Nose began climbing, wand between his teeth, while the witch worked to repair the chains around the crate. Emil lay slumped among the parcels, one hand twitching towards his dropped wand. The storm petrels had stopped screaming. They faced the open hatch now, tiny beaks lifted into the wind. The tunnel began to lighten ahead, first a gray seam, then a widening mouth full of rain and distant hills. Newt saw it and tapped the crate's rhythm against the hatch rim. 3, pause 2. From inside the broken boards, the creature answered with a sound like glass singing underwater. The train burst into the night. Rain plunged through the open hatch, drenching Newt and sweeping the soot from his face. Above him, the clouds tore apart over a broad valley, exposing a scatter of hard white stars, and their light fell through the opening in one clean shaft to strike the creature's wing. Every pattern beneath the membrane blazed at once, no longer drifting at random. They locked into the same arrangement as the sky. Chains snapped. The crate opened from within, boards folding outward beneath a vast, careful pressure. A long neck rose first, narrow and feathered with silver filaments that shimmered blue at their tips. 2 swept-back horns framed a delicate head, and the dark eye Newt had seen at the harbor widened beneath the stars. The lower chain still trapped its body, but one wing unfurled through the shattered roof of the crate and filled the carriage from wall to wall. No one fired. Lifting its face towards the hatch, the creature gave a trembling call that carried no fury at all. Newt heard distance in it, high valleys, cold lakes, wind moving over stone. Broken Nose froze halfway up the ladder, one hand still reaching for Newt's boot. Below him, the cloche-hatted witch lowered her wand by an inch. Then the train rounded a mountainside bend, and the stars swung towards the opposite windows. The creature turned after them, dragging the broken crate across the floor, wrenching the remaining chains from their bolts. Newt looked from its wing to the open hatch, and then to the low tunnel ahead, where the track disappeared beneath another ridge. It did not need a stronger cage. It needed the roof gone. The next tunnel crouched across the track less than a mile off, its stone mouth flashing between curtains of rain, and Newt saw the creature see it. The silver filaments along its neck flattened, the constellations on its wing broke apart, and its 4-toed foot dug grooves into the carriage floor as it tried to turn away from the darkness. Broken Nose reached for the hatch. "Close it before the thing gets out." Newt dropped from the ladder and landed between him and the handle. That is precisely what it ought to do. The man's wand came up, though his attention kept sliding towards the wing pressed against the walls. He said Newt didn't know what it was. "No," Newt said, "but I know what you've done to it." Behind them, the cloche-hatted witch tightened her grip on the remaining chain and planted a boot against the crate's shattered base. Among the parcels, Emil stirred, blinking through the pane, and on his chest sat the Niffler. examining the buttons of his waistcoat with professional interest. A low whistle sounded from the creature's throat as the tunnel drew nearer. It folded its wing with painful care, avoiding the storm petrel cage and the shelves, where the glass leeches still drained color from the post. Even now, with space opening around it, it chose where to place each limb. One curved toe slipped beneath a fallen parcel and nudged it clear of the dragging chain. Newt crouched beside the iron restraint around its body. "There you are," he murmured. "You've been blamed for every broken thing in the room, and you're still tidying." No ordinary lock held the chain. A black market-binding charm had fused each link to the next until the whole length behaved like a single piece of iron, and when Newt touched his wand to the metal, he felt the spell recoil through the handle, oily and resistant. "Merrick," the witch said, never taking her eyes off him. "Stop him now." Broken Nose hesitated. The creature's head had turned towards him, the vast dark pupil reflecting his raised wand without threat. "Runa," he said, "the buyer wanted it alive." "Then keep it alive." Her curse struck the chain beside Newt's hand. Black light raced through the links, tightening them until they bit into the creature's silver filaments and drew a ragged cry from its throat. The unfolded wing slammed against the ceiling, buckling a brass luggage rack and showering the carriage with screws. Newt wheeled on her, wand raised at last. Finite. The curse broke. The creature's panic did not. Rain and smoke poured through the hatch while the tunnel filled the forward windows, and Newt could already hear its stone echo, a deep, rushing growl beneath the wheels. The creature pulled towards the strip of sky above, yet the chain held its body low and twisted one wing against the carriage wall. Emil pushed the niffler aside and crawled towards his fallen wand. Could Newt cut it? He asked. Not before the tunnel. Newt weighed the roof supports, the hatch frame, the narrow gap around the creature's wing. But the carriage may be more cooperative. Broken Nose gave a humorless laugh and asked whether he meant to dismantle a moving train. Only the least useful portion. A railway warning horn blared from the engine. Newt pointed his wand at the row of rivets fastening the roof panel above the crate and sent a precise severing charm along their heads, and the metal pinged loose, one after another, vanishing into the mail sacks and the niffler's delighted paws. Runa fired at him. Emil deflected the curse into the ceiling, where it turned a brass lamp into a shrieking cockatoo. The bird flapped through the storm petrels, shouting obscenities in French. Broken Nose lunged before he could finish the cut. They struck the side of the crate together, Newt's shoulder against Merrick's chest, both men sliding over wet letters as the train rocked. Merrick was heavier, stronger, accustomed to settling disputes with his fists. Newt ducked the first blow, took the second against his cheek, then drove his case between them and snapped the latches open. A striped head thrust out with a furious snort. Scarcely larger than a spaniel, the baby manticore was all oversized paws, folded wings, and indignation. It sprang onto Merrick's shoulder, wrapped its tail around his neck, and set to licking his ear with a rasping tongue. Merrick shouted and staggered backwards, afraid to strike a thing whose sting had not yet matured, but whose mother might conceivably be somewhere nearby. "She's teething," Newt warned, rubbing his jaw. "Try not to excite her." The last roof rivet broke free. Wind caught the loosened panel and lifted one edge with a howl, bending the sheet of metal upward like the lid of a tin. Rain flooded the carriage, drowning the remaining lamps and flattening everyone's clothes against their bodies. And above them the stars appeared, through a widening rectangle sharp and steady beyond the racing clouds. The creature stretched its neck into the opening and drew one deep breath. Its whole body changed beneath the sky. The frantic silver light softened, constellations settling across its wings in orderly streams, while the muscles around the chain gave up their wild straining. Newt placed a hand against the restraint and felt the animal hold still for him. "Good," he said, sawing his wand through the weakened binding spell. "You know where you are now." The tunnel swallowed the engine, then the first passenger carriages. Darkness rushed towards the mail van, in a wall of stone and smoke, but the creature did not scream. Its gaze stayed fixed on the last visible stars through the torn roof. Newt followed that gaze and understood that the beast was measuring the sky, memorizing its place before it vanished. "Clever thing," he whispered. The mail carriage plunged beneath the mountain just as the chain split. Freed weight struck the floor, and the creature folded itself instantly, drawing wings, neck, and limbs into the smallest shape its body allowed. Newt threw both arms around the nearest iron post as the loosened roof scraped sparks from the tunnel ceiling. Behind him, smugglers, parcels, storm petrels, and one furious manticore vanished into blackness and noise. Through all of it, the creature stayed still beside him, waiting for the sky to return. Stone scraped the loosened roof with a shriek that drowned even the wheels. Sparks poured through the torn seams, skittering across the wet mail sacks and bursting against the creature's folded wings without scorching them. Newt clung to the iron post, while the carriage bucked beneath him, one boot trapped under a chain, his case wedged hard against his ribs. Somewhere in the blackness, the manticore cub hissed. The French cockatoo swore magnificently, and Merrick demanded that somebody get the claws out of his scalp. Beside Newt, the creature held itself so still that only the shifting points beneath its skin betrayed its breath. The tunnel curved, and the curve pressed everyone hard towards the left wall. Runa hit the floor, shoulder first, her wand gone beneath a tide of international post. Emil slid past Newt and got both hands round the storm petrel cage, a moment before it met the stove. "Got them," he gasped, hugging the bars to his chest, while blue flashes lit his frightened face. On hands and knees, Merrick crawled after the manticore cub, offering it money, meat, and several countries in exchange for the return of his hair. "Don't bargain with her," Newt called. "She's too young to understand currency and old enough to exploit weakness." A grinding boom ran the length of the roof. One of the bent panels tore free and vanished backwards, and through the jagged gap, it left the tunnel lamps flashed in rapid amber bars. Each pulse crossed the creature's eye, and the pupil tightened in time with them. It was counting again. Newt tapped 3 against the iron post, paused, tapped twice more, and from somewhere, deep in the animal's throat, came a soft, answering click. Emil had edged close enough now that the storm petrel's lightning showed the swelling on his shoulder. "Does it know us?" he asked. Newt worked his boot free of the chain. "It knows patterns, voices, bells, rainfall, stars. Perhaps people given sufficient encouragement." Merrick spat soot from his mouth and offered his own assessment. It knew how to ruin a train. At that, the creature turned its head towards him. A splinter of roof metal had lodged between the silver filaments along its neck, and a narrow line of dark fluid marked the skin beneath. Merrick saw it too and stopped speaking. No snarl came, no lunge, only a careful lowering of the head towards Newt. Its trust arrived the way anything does after too many closed fists, approaching an open hand and hesitating. Palms visible, Newt moved slowly. The train's motion threw him against the animal's shoulder, and it steadied him with the curved edge of one folded wing. This close, the filaments along its neck were finer than feathers, and they rang faintly wherever they brushed metal. He pinched the shard between two fingers and drew it free. The dark fluid brightened to silver in the air, then vanished like mist before it reached the floor. One deep note from the creature, and every storm petrel answered. Their tiny bodies lit in sequence, cage bars flashing blue-white from one end to the other. As the larger beast lowered its head towards them, the patterns across its folded wings shifted into the same rhythm. Newt watched the exchange with his mouth slightly open. "You travel with storms," he said, "or near them. Those markings aren't merely maps." Runa found her wand beneath a sack of Belgian pension notices. She rose behind the creature, soaked hat hanging by a single pin, lipstick smeared across one cheek. "Move away, Scamander." Her voice held steady, though her wrist trembled when she aimed. Newt did not turn. There was nowhere useful for it to move, he told her, until they were out of the tunnel. "You have cost us the buyer, the carriage, and perhaps the train." The carriage was poorly designed. The creature's filaments lifted before Runa cast. It heard the spell in her grip, perhaps, or felt the wand's heat, and it swung its wing between Newt and the curse. Red light struck the silver membrane and broke into harmless sparks, but the impact drove the animal against the wall, and where the spell landed, a whole row of constellations went dark. Whatever distracted softness usually lived in Newt's face drained out of it. "Expelliarmus." Runa's wand flew through the roof gap and was gone into the tunnel dark. She stared at her empty hand, more offended than alarmed, until Emil stepped between her and the creature. The storm petrel cage still clutched to his chest. Merrick finally pulled the manticore cub off his head and held it out at arm's length. The cub purred, pleased with how things were going. Head, a pale square, widened as the tunnel mouth came on. Fresh rain blew in through the broken roof, carrying pine resin, wood smoke, and the cold mineral scent of mountain streams. The creature unfolded a little, testing the space it had, and its damaged constellations came back, one star at a time. When the train burst into open country, it thrust its head through the gap and called into the storm. From the mountains, an answer rolled back. It was too deep for thunder and too musical for any railway whistle. A long descending chord that trembled through the carriage walls. The creature surged upwards, lifting half its body into the rain, and for one glorious second, Newt believed another of its kind had heard. Then the echo broke against the cliffs and came back in fragments, and the animal's call stopped. Beyond the windows, the track ran along a high wooded valley towards a city spread out beneath steep hills. Copper roofs gleamed red-black in the rain, crowded around domes and clock towers and narrow chimneys. Above certain streets, Magical lamps drifted in clusters like captive fireflies, and broom traffic moved between the taller buildings despite the weather. Far below, a river bent through the city, reflecting a broken path of moonlight. The creature leaned towards the eastern hills rather than the rooftops, its wing markings streaming that way, while the storm petrels chirped and flashed beside it. Newt followed the line from the stars overhead to the dark ridge beyond the city. The shape matched the frost map from the carriage window, all but one crucial absence. The broken western summit was nowhere near them. "This isn't home," he said. Merrick heard and gave a bitter laugh. "Of course it isn't. Home doesn't pay." He shoved the manticore cub into Newt's open case and snapped the lid before she could object, then turned towards the city, where a private goods platform waited beneath the lamps of the outer station. "But our buyer may still." Brakes shrieked across the wet rails as the train began to slow. Below the torn roof, Runa retrieved a second wand from inside her boot, and Emil quietly lowered the storm petrel cage to the floor. Newt saw both movements. So did the creature. Above them, the rain swept clear a broad patch of sky, and the beast raised its wings toward stars that pointed on past the city. Then the brakes screamed again beneath the carriage, throwing sparks along the rails as the train entered the city's outer yards. Rain silvered the signal posts and gathered in trembling beads under the telegraph wires, and rows of freight sheds slid past behind curtains of steam. Crouched beneath the torn roof, wings half open, the creature read every break in the clouds above the chimneys. Newt watched the patterns across its skin change whenever the eastern ridge showed between buildings. "You know the direction," he said softly. "You simply can't reach it from in here." Runa's second wand snapped towards the broken chain. Incarcerus. Thick ropes burst from the tip, twisting around the creature's legs and dragging its wings against its body. The beast stumbled but did not strike back. It only lowered its neck to keep from crushing Emil beneath one shoulder. Newt fired before the next loop could tighten and cut 3 cords in midair. The fourth caught his case and hauled it across the floor, and a storm of offended squeaks rose from inside. At the side door, Merrick forced the handle down. Night air slammed into the carriage as the train slowed beside a private platform hidden behind a wall of stacked coal. 5 figures waited there, under umbrellas, charmed to turn away both rain and curious glances. Expensive robes, veiled faces, and in one pair of hands a silver measuring rod where a wand should have been. The smugglers had found their buyer after all. "Keep it down," Merrick ordered. "Once we're off the train, the wards will hold." Emil looked from the waiting group to the creature's dark eye and asked what sort of wards. "The sort people pay for," Merrick said. That, Emil answered, wasn't what he'd asked. The carriage jolted over a set of points. Runa lost her footing, and for half a breath the ropes around the creature slackened. Newt ducked beneath one vast wing and got to the nearest knot, enchanted horsehair braided with powdered rune-spore scale, unpleasantly resilient and inclined to bite anyone who tampered with it. "You'll need to hold still," he murmured, "which is unfair, I realize." One rope snapped at his fingers and opened a line of blood across the knuckle. The creature bent its head and breathed over the cut. Cold light spread through the sting. The blood lifted in tiny red beads and dissolved into silver vapor. Newt blinked at his hand. That's useful. The beast gave a low, chiming note, and for the first time something almost playful moved through the stars along its throat. The train shuddered to a halt, and Merrick dropped onto the platform, signaling to the buyers as two of them raised black lacquered poles fitted with copper hooks. A rectangular field of pale magic sprang up around the carriage door. Rain struck it and crawled sideways, unable to pass through. The creature recoiled before its body had even come near the barrier. Newt saw the reaction and stopped cutting. It can sense enclosed magic. Emil lowered his wand and said it had sensed the tunnels too, and Newt nodded. Metal, wards, roofs, anything that interrupted the sky. Perhaps it navigated through more than sight. He studied the pale barrier where the reflected lamps bent into distorted arcs. That cage will hurt it before they even close the door. Gee. One of the veiled buyers stepped nearer, her voice carrying through the rain with the crispness of a bank clerk refusing a loan. Bring the specimen out. Merrick climbed back aboard, wet hair plastered across his forehead, and told Runa she'd heard the woman. Runa tightened the remaining ropes, aimed at the creature's neck, and told it to move. The beast planted all 4 feet against the carriage floor. Across its wings, the constellations gathered towards the spine, dimming at the edges, and the silver filaments along its body chimed against one another in a rising tremor. The buyers mistook it for defiance. Newt recognized calculation. It was measuring the opening. "Don't force it through," he said. Merrick shoved him aside and struck the creature's flank with the flat of his wand. The animal surged, dragging the broken crate and half the remaining chains towards the door, and buyers scattered as the carriage groaned on its springs. But one pace from the barrier, the beast stopped and twisted its body sharply, and its wing struck the roof panel above the opposite wall. Copper fastenings tore free. The remaining section of roof peeled upward and crashed onto the platform, flattening 3 umbrellas and sending the measuring rod spinning into a puddle. Open night flooded the carriage from end to end, and the creature threw back its head, stars blazing across both wings. Newt understood before anyone else moved. It had never meant to use the door. Upward, the beast sprang, through the broken roof, ropes snapping behind it like wet thread. One wing caught the edge of the carriage and sent a shower of rivets across the platform. The other opened above the train in a sweep of silver blue light. For a breath it hovered against the rain, enormous and uncertain, rooftops rising beyond the yards in every direction. Then the ward poles discharged together. Pale chains of magic leapt from the platform and wrapped one hind leg. The creature lurched sideways, struck a signal gantry, and vanished beyond the freight sheds, with the chains still trailing. Somewhere in the dark, tiles shattered. A line of blue-white light flashed across the roofs, then disappeared behind a clock tower. The buyers erupted in furious orders. Merrick vaulted from the carriage after them with Runa close behind, while Emil stayed at the doorway, rain running from his chin. "They'll bring it down," he said. Newt closed his case around the niffler's reaching paws and stepped onto the platform. "Only if we let them choose the route." Beyond the station wall, bells rang the quarter hour across the unfamiliar city, their notes rolling over wet copper roofs, tangled alleys, and chimney pots breathing green smoke. Far above, something answered with 3 faint chimes, a pause, then 2. Newt looked up and ran. The station wall ended in a locked iron gate, so he climbed it badly and landed in a courtyard full of rain barrels, broom crates, and 6 astonished witches smoking beneath a striped awning. Somewhere above the roofs, tiles broke in a fast-moving trail from west to east. The creature's silver glow flashed between chimneys, vanished behind a cupola, then reappeared 3 streets away, with one wing dragging lower than the other. He seized his case before it slid into a gutter. "Excuse me," he said to the witches, already crossing their card game. Large, frightened animal. A narrow passage spilled him into the old city, where rain had polished the cobbles black, and every shop sign swung on its chains. Whenever the door of a late-night apothecary opened, it breathed out fennel, dragon liver, and hot vinegar, and enchanted tram cars clanged along the lower avenue with blue sparks snapping beneath their wheels. Overhead, roof bridges linked the taller buildings for witches unwilling to descend among muggle traffic. Newt followed the broken tiles instead, ducking beneath washing lines and slipping past a bakery whose gingerbread gargoyles shouted conflicting directions. "Silver Devil went that way," cried one, pointing uphill. "Liar," snapped another. "It went through the Hatter's chimney." The third had lost its head to the rain and offered no opinion. A curse cracked above the chimneys, and the creature answered with a burst of pale light that illuminated wet slates, drain pipes, and 3 smugglers racing along a roof line. Merrick led with his wand drawn, boots striking sparks from the copper ridges, while Runa carried one of the lacquered ward poles across her shoulders. 2 buyers followed at a safer distance, casting nets that spread through the rain like black cobwebs. Each missed the beast and fastened itself to masonry, tearing chimney pots apart as it tightened. At the back of a music hall, Newt reached a fire stair and began climbing. The iron steps rang beneath him, slick with rain and powdered with feathers from a nesting flock of nocturnal jabberknolls. Unlike their diurnal cousins, these small black birds remembered sounds that had not happened yet, and every one of them began repeating Newt's approaching footsteps a second before his boots landed. "That's disconcerting," he muttered. The jabberknolls answered in his own voice. "That's disconcerting," until the entire stairwell seemed full of anxious Scamanders. The rooftop smelled of wet copper, chimney soot, and the sharp sweetness of crystallized violets from the confectioner below. Wind tugged at his coat as he crossed a row of slanted panes and climbed onto the ridge. Ahead, the creature crouched atop a domed theater roof, one hind leg bound by the buyer's pale chain, its wings half spread for balance, their constellations scattering whenever the chain pulled. Though cornered, it had turned its body around 3 small cages caught against a parapet. Inside them, 2 moon calves pressed their enormous eyes to the bars, while a young demigeese flickered in and out of sight beneath a soaked blanket. The illegal menagerie had been abandoned by its keeper when the chase crossed the roof. Each time the beast shifted, it shielded the cages from falling tiles with one wing. Runa saw only the opening at its exposed flank. "Hold it there!" Newt raised his wand. "Protego!" Her curse struck a shield above the demiguise's cage and scattered into red sparks. Merrick spun towards him, rain dripping from his broken nose, and asked whether he ever stopped following people. "Frequently," Newt said, edging along the ridge. People are rarely this interesting. The creature's eye found him. Its breathing slowed by a fraction, though the chain around its leg tightened as the ward pole hummed in Runa's hands. Newt looked at the trapped moon calves, the shivering demigees, and the beast curved protectively around them, and the truth that had been forming since the train settled into sudden clarity. Its violence had always struck walls, roofs, chains, and spells. Whenever living things stood in its path, it had altered its own body instead. "It isn't hunting," he said. "It's herding." Merrick laughed without amusement and asked what it could possibly be herding. A loose chimney brick slid towards one mooncalf cage, and the creature caught it against its wing before it could crush the bars. The impact tore the membrane near its shoulder. Silver vapor streamed from the wound and blew away over the rooftops. Newt moved faster. Anything, frightened enough to need it. Runa swung the ward pole forward. The pale chain jerked hard, dragging the creature's leg out from beneath it, and one wing struck the dome, denting copper with a deep gong that rolled across the city. The mooncalf cages began sliding towards the roof's edge. Newt dropped his case, flung himself onto his stomach, and caught the nearest handle with both hands while the second cage swung over open air. A silver-blue limb reached past him. 4 curved toes closed delicately around the dangling cage and lifted it back onto the roof. Face down in the rain, Newt stared at the creature's foot, inches from his cheek. One talon could have opened him from shoulder to hip. Instead, it released the cage gently and withdrew. "Thank you," he said. The beast lowered its head until its horned brow nearly touched his. Stars moved across its iris, no longer fixed on the eastern ridge. They had shifted towards a tower rising above the surrounding roofs, crowned by a glass dome, and a great brass instrument pointed at the clouds. An observatory, old enough that its copper ribs had turned green. Behind Newt, the demigees winked out of the world entirely, and a moment later, Runa cried out as an unseen hand wrenched the ward pole from her grip. Down the curve of the dome, the lacquered shaft went skittering, and it caught Merrick across the ankles and swept him neatly into a chimney stack. Around the creature's leg, the pale chain flickered loose. "Good timing," Newt told the empty space beside the cages. The creature threw itself towards the observatory. Its injured wing failed on the first stroke and dropped it low enough to tear the weather vanes from 3 roofs, but the second beat caught the wind, and silver light rolled over chimneys and cupolas as it glided out across the city. After it went, the smugglers, scrambling onto a charmed delivery broom that had been tethered outside the music hall. Newt opened his case, coaxed the mooncalves and demigees down into it, and then considered the gap between the rooftops. It was a great deal wider than it had looked from below. 6 stories down, rainwater streamed into the alley, carrying broken tiles and violet petals off towards the gutters. From the case, the niffler poked out its head, with a brass tram token clamped between its teeth. "No," Newt said. "This is not the moment for commerce." He stepped onto the steep pitch of the roof, ran 3 paces and jumped. He struck the far roof chest first, slid through a river of rainwater, and caught a copper ridge with both elbows before the alley could have him. His case landed beside him, bounced once, and snapped open just far enough for the Niffler to peer down at the street with scholarly concern. A tram bell clanged below, and a muggle cab driver shouted at nobody in particular. Newt hauled one knee onto the tiles, shut the case, and climbed towards the observatory with the water pouring out of his sleeves. Away across the rooftops, the creature moved in broken glides. Every beat of that injured wing sent silver vapor streaming off into the rain, and the trailing chain struck the chimneys with pale flashes. It kept clear of the crowded streets, choosing warehouses and churches and empty upper stories, even where the longer way cost it height. Twice it dropped towards the broad avenues and twice veered off again as late pedestrians came out under their umbrellas. Newt watched it make those choices and quickened. The stolen broom roared overhead, with 3 people clinging to it, and not one of them seated properly. Merrick lay flat along the handle and steered with both fists. Behind him, Runa crouched with her replacement wand drawn, and a veiled buyer hung off the tail bristles, her boots knocking against the chimney pots as she tried to bring up the silver measuring rod. "Bring us nearer," she shouted. Merrick yelled back that he was bringing them nearer and that she was making it heavier. Runa fired first. Her curse crossed the rain as a red spiral and struck the chain wrapped round the creature's hind leg, and rather than breaking it, the spell drove a violent pulse up the links. The beast folded in midair, clipped the stone angel atop a chapel, and came down on a glass-roofed arcade. The panes went under its weight in a rolling wave of breakage, though at the last instant the creature twisted and spread one wing over the shoppers below. Newt reached the arcade roof by way of a dormer window belonging to a startled clockmaker. Brass filings, lamp oil, and burnt sugar from a kettle boiling itself dry. The workshop smelled of all 3 at once. Overhead, the creature's body settled across the glass, and hundreds of clocks stopped in the same instant, every pendulum arrested at a different point of its swing. The clockmaker looked from Newt to the silver shadow and asked whether it was his. "No," Newt said, climbing onto the workbench. "That is rather the difficulty." A circular window let onto the upper canopy of the arcade. Newt squeezed through it and stepped carefully between the fractured panes, keeping to the iron supports under his boots. The creature lay across the roof with its head lowered, shielding the crowd below, while broken glass slid around its limbs. Up through the gaps came shrieks and running feet, and the furious honking of a bewitched perfume kiosk. Even so, the beast did not move, not until the last of the shoppers had reached the exits. "You waited," Newt said, coming along the iron frame. "Of course you did." The creature lifted its wounded wing. A strip of membrane near the shoulder had split along one constellation line, and several points of light drifted loose beneath the surface, like stars shaken out of their places. From a side compartment of his case, Newt drew a roll of plain dragon hide bandage. The beast watched his hand a moment, then turned its glance towards the observatory dome standing up above the next row of roofs. "I know," Newt murmured. "Only a moment." He laid the bandage over the tear without drawing it tight, anchoring the edges where the silver filaments ran strongest. Once, when his fingers brushed the wound, the creature flinched. Then it held steady and let him work. This close, the moving patterns across the wing no longer looked like decoration at all. They answered to open sky to magnetic stone, to storms, perhaps to sounds pitched too low for a human ear, the whole of it woven into a living map. Above the arcade, the stolen broom came round again. Merrick banked hard between two towers. The buyer raised her measuring rod, and a fan of pale lines spread from its tip to form a geometric cage in the air around the beast. Wherever those lines crossed the sky, the creature's markings vanished under them. Its head jerked up, and the iron frame groaned beneath its claws. "Stay down," Runa called from the broom. "The next one closes." The creature rose. Glass came down through the arcade in sparkling sheets, and still its wings stayed stretched over the open spaces until the people beneath had cleared them. Newt braced one hand against its shoulder and aimed his wand at the pale grid. Defindo! A single line split and knit itself back together at once. Behind her veil, the buyer smiled. Custom work. The cage drew in. Copper roofs and rain and stars warped behind its bars, twisting the city into a false horizon, and the creature turned about in confusion, its wing beats striking the grid and throwing off white sparks across the skyline. Newt watched its eye go searching for the observatory and lose it again each time the lines cut across its view. It did not need another path drawn for it. It needed the false sky taken away. He looked down through the shattered roof. The clocks in the workshop stood frozen still, their brass faces angled up towards him, and beyond them was the clockmaker, next to a huge wall mechanism strung by chains and counterweights to the building's decorative roof shutters. "Sir," Newt called down, "do those open?" The clockmaker stared up through the broken glass and said that they opened at noon. Could they open now? They'll ruin the timing. Another pale line drew closed around the creature's injured wing. Newt glanced at the tightening cage. "I suspect the evening has already become irregular." At that, the clockmaker seized a long, winding key and drove it into the central mechanism. Gears engaged beneath the walls with a thunderous clank, and one by one the arcade's copper shutters lifted away from the glass to lay bare broad strips of genuine night. Rain swept in through the building, drowning the lamps, sending perfume bottles dancing across the floor. Above, the creature's constellations blazed back into their places. It spread both wings and drove upward through the weakening cage. The pale lines snapped across the sky like overstretched wire. The broom spun away in the burst of silver light. Merrick shouted. Runa lost her hat, and the veiled buyer let the measuring rod fall into the arcade, where it came to rest inside a clock showing 23 impossible hours. Up towards the observatory dome, the creature climbed, with Newt clinging to the base of one horn. He had not intended to do that. The horn was smooth as polished ivory and a good deal less convenient than a broom handle, and he clung to it with one arm hooked around its base while the city fell away beneath his boots in a confusion of wet roofs, glowing tram lines, and courtyards no bigger than postage stamps. The rain came at him sideways, filling his ears and dragging at his coat until the fabric cracked like a flag, and every beat of the injured wing tilted the pair of them sharply towards the chimneys. "You needn't carry me," Newt called, though there was little practical means of getting off. A low chime traveled up through the horn and into his ribs. The beast turned one dark eye on him, stars moving across the iris, and altered its flight just enough to keep his case from catching a weather vane. A careful gesture, almost reproachful. Newt tightened his grip as they skimmed a hotel roof where 3 witches in evening gowns abandoned their champagne and dived under a table. "Yes," he said. "I realized this was my decision." Ahead, the observatory crowned the highest ridge of the old city. Its stone drum rose above tiled houses and thin cypress trees to support a great copper dome streaked green with age. Brass rails ran round the roof. Along the parapet, the zodiac figures marched with their faces turned up towards the clouds. Heavy shutters had sealed the slit in the dome, and only a thin blade of lamplight showed between them. At the sight of that closed metal shell, the creature faltered. Its wings lost their rhythm. One struck the rein too late, and they dropped hard enough to leave Newt's stomach several yards behind him. Silver patterns raced across the membrane in broken spirals. The pale chain trailing from its leg whipped round a stone griffin on the parapet, and the creature jerked to a stop against the observatory wall, claws scraping sparks from the copper gutter. Newt slid down its neck and landed with one knee in a pool of rainwater. "Hold still," he said, and followed the chain towards the griffin. The magical links had drawn tight around the stone creature's wings, anchoring the beast beneath the dome. Its injured shoulder trembled under the makeshift bandage, and yet it made no attempt to wrench free while he stood well within reach of its talons. Instead, it lowered itself, offering him the trapped leg. The observatory door banged open. Out came an elderly wizard in plum slippers, an umbrella in one hand and a dueling pistol in the other, though the pistol's barrel had been fitted with a wand core. White hair flew about his spectacles as he took in the creature spread across his roof. "No visitors after midnight," he said, "especially migratory catastrophes." "My apologies." Newt crouched beside the chain and tested a link with his wand. "Could you open the dome?" The astronomer looked offended. "In this rain?" Before Newt could answer, the stolen broom scraped over the parapet. Merrick tumbled off first, rolled across the copper, and fetched up against the base of Sagittarius with his shoulder. Runa landed more neatly, bareheaded now, rain streaking her dark hair across her face. Behind them came the veiled buyer on a second broom, with 2 wand men from the station. Their shoes had barely touched the roof before they fanned out around the trapped creature. "Step away from the specimen," the buyer said. Her veil had torn during the chase, and it showed a narrow face and a bruise darkening one temple. She raised another silver instrument, this one shaped like a tuning fork with rotating runes along its stem. "Its injuries have reduced the value considerably, but the breeding rights remain attractive." At the word breeding, the creature's head snapped towards her. The constellations across its throat contracted into a single blazing line that pointed east, out beyond the city and the black surrounding hills. Newt looked from the markings to the closed dome above them. This was no simple hunger for open space. The beast was trying to rejoin a route written into the season, the stars, and its own body. "You took it from a migrating group," Newt said. Merrick wiped blood from his mouth. "There was only one." "No." Newt laid his palm against the creature's neck and felt a rhythm beneath the chiming filaments, slow and layered, full of pauses that waited on distant answers. "There was only one you managed to catch." The markings on its wings were not a personal map at all. They were a shared pattern, a way for scattered animals to find the same currents across hundreds of miles. Runa aimed at the beast's exposed shoulder. It belongs to whoever can hold it. Her voice cracked on the final word, whether from cold or fury he could not tell. The creature shifted, putting its body between her wand and the astronomer, who had not stirred from the doorway. Newt saw the motion and rose. It has spent the entire night protecting people who were trying to hurt it, he said. That must be exhausting. The buyer struck the tuning fork against the copper roof. A flat metallic note spread out through the rain, and the creature collapsed as though the sky itself had pressed down on its spine. Its lights went out from wingtip to wingtip. Newt felt the vibration in his teeth and knew it at once. The same disorientation as the train roof, the ward cage, the metal restraints, all condensed now into one deliberate weapon. Marek flinched at the sound. You said it would only stun it. It will recover. The second strike never landed. Newt's wand sent the tuning fork spinning over the parapet, where it rang once against a gutter and was gone into the city below. Runa fired at him. Marek shouted, and the astronomer discharged his wand pistol into the roof with a crack like cannon fire. From the parapet, a flock of stone zodiac figures leapt down, galloping and crawling between the smugglers' feet until curses flew in every direction. Newt dropped beside the creature and pressed both hands to its head. The dark eye had closed, but faint points still moved beneath the lid. Listen, he said, and tapped the familiar rhythm against its horn. 3, pause, 2. The sky is still there. Above them, the dome stayed shut. Amid the confusion, the astronomer stood with his slippers planted wide and smoke curling from the pistol's barrel. Newt looked at him across the creature's folded wing. Please open it. The old wizard glanced at the rain, then at the armed smugglers, then at the silver beast sprawled across his roof, and raised his umbrella towards a brass lever beside the doorway. The great shutters began to move. Deep inside the observatory, the gears groaned as the copper dome split along its center. Rainwater cascaded from the widening seam. Beneath it, the hidden telescope turned slowly, black and immense against the lamps. Metal rolled back on either side until the clouds, the stars, and the whole wet breadth of night opened above the creature. One silver point appeared beneath its closed eyelid, then another. Light came back across the creature's body slowly, traveling from the eye beneath Newt's hand to the silver filaments along its neck. One constellation after another unfolded beneath its wings, each point answering a star now visible through the opened dome. Rain struck the telescope, the copper floor, and the creature's horns in a steady, bright drumming. Newt tapped the familiar pattern once more. 3, pause, 2. From beyond the city, a deeper rhythm answered. Everyone on the roof went still. It came out of the eastern darkness, too measured for thunder and too vast for bells. A chain of distant notes passing from ridge to ridge. The creature lifted its head, and the sound beneath its skin joined the call until the copper dome hummed around them. Some were out past the rain, others were crossing the night. The beast rose on shaking legs. Its injured wing opened halfway, the bandage dark against the luminous membrane, while the magical chain stayed twisted round the stone griffin and its hind ankle. Newt crouched beside the last restraint and examined the links. The binding spell had weakened under rain and strain, though pale runes still crawled over the metal whenever he brought his wand near. Merrick staggered upright by the parapet. Blood ran from his nose, and one sleeve had been torn open by the animated stone Capricorn now chewing at his cuff. "Don't," he said, as Newt touched his wand to the chain. There was little command left in the word. It sounded like a man watching the only profitable decision of his life walk away. Runa stepped towards him, breathing hard, her wand lowered but ready. "We crossed 3 borders for that animal." "It crossed rather more before you interfered," Newt said. "Stand back." She looked at the open sky, at the creature's raised head, at the buyers gathering their courage near the observatory door. For several seconds her jaw worked without sound. The unveiled buyer recovered first. Stun them both. Her wandmen raised their arms together, boots braced against the rain-slick roof. The creature turned towards them, wings lifting despite the pain, and Newt saw the old pattern repeat itself, its body set between danger and every living thing behind it. The astronomer stood directly in its shadow, plum slippers just visible beneath one silver wing. Merrick swore and drove his shoulder into the nearest wandman. The curse flew wide, struck Gemini on the parapet, and split the stone twins into 4 furious children. Runa's spell caught the second man's wand and wrapped it in flowering ivy before he could fire. "I am tired," she said through clenched teeth, "of people changing the terms after payment." The buyer stared at her. "You work for me." "No," Runa said. "I worked for the money." Chaos broke across the roof, but it never quite tipped into a battle. Stone zodiac beasts snapped at ankles, ivy went climbing up sleeves, and the astronomer loosed warning shots that turned the falling rain into glass marbles that bounced and scattered under the buyer's feet. Through the observatory doorway came Emil, the rescued storm petrels cupped against his chest, having reached the hill. By some means, he looked far too exhausted to explain. Their tiny bodies flashed blue in answer to the creature's call. None of the shouting reached Newt. He slid his wand beneath the chain, at the place where the spell had welded 2 links into a single knot. Force would only tighten it. Fire would burn the creature, and a severing charm might rebound straight through the runes. So instead he rested his free hand against the animal's ankle and waited for the rhythm to come up through its skin. "On the next call," he whispered. Somewhere off in the dark, the other creatures sang again. At the first note, the Celestine Vontour's filaments lifted and the metal runes brightened. At the second, the living map across its wing shifted eastward, dragging the binding spell along with it as though the chain were just one more false line laid over the sky. Newt turned his wand the same way, following the movement rather than fighting it, and the runes came undone. Iron links dropped around his boots with a heavy clatter. Drawing its freed leg up beneath itself, the Vontour rose to full height until it towered over the observatory dome. Its wings opened across the whole roof, one of them ragged and bandaged, the other broad enough to catch the rain and pour it down in silver streams. The smugglers lowered their wands, while constellations wheeled over them. Still it did not leave, not right away. It bent that long neck towards the storm petrel cage and touched one horn gently to the bars, and the tiny birds flickered like fragments of summer lightning. Emile opened the door. Up they burst in a blue cloud, circling the Ventour's head once, before climbing away through the dome. The mooncalves came next, peering out of Newt's case with round eyes as the beast lowered its face to meet them. At Newt's elbow, the demigeese appeared, damp silver fur clinging to its narrow shoulders. Even the niffler crept out, though its attention stayed fixed on the astronomer's brass buttons. Soft enough to stir the mooncalves' ears, the Ventour chimed once. Newt stepped back. "The ridge is east," he said, and pointed off beyond the roofs. "You knew that before I did." The creature watched his hand, then raised its gaze to the stars, and across its wings, the migration pattern settled into one clean path. Wind poured through the open dome. The Ventour sprang from the copper roof, dipped low over the observatory garden, and beat its wings above the city. Tiles trembled, chimneys exhaled green sparks, and every clock in the old quarter struck a different hour, while the creature climbed on through the rain, with the storm petrel streaming at its side. Beyond the eastern ridge, more silver shapes were coming out of the clouds. One, then three, then a whole distant line of them crossing beneath the stars, their calls threading through the night. The freed Ventour answered and rose to meet them, that wounded wing finding the shared current at last. Newt stayed at the edge of the observatory roof, rain running from his hair, one hand resting on the open case. High above the city, the silver shapes turned east together until they were no larger than sparks. The last of them passed across a clearing in the clouds, and for a single heartbeat, the night itself grew wings. The storm beasts were never caught. There is no cage for a thing made mostly of weather and longing. This night went into no book of beasts. It lived on only as a single bright feather at the bottom of a battered case. And on clear nights above the high passes, the old handlers still nod at the thunder and say, "The wind has family."